The major glared at his watch, irritation creeping into his features. General Stonewall was making a simple policy change a far bigger ordeal than necessary. As I was saying, the general continued, since all of America's enemies are defeated and only come to us for money, we're cutting funding for special weapons projects. Some we can't cancel because of political pressure, but yours, GC-161, will be the first to go. Get ready to dispose of those samples you've created. But, General, you've slashed our budget. How are we supposed to? Relax, Major. You'll find a way. You always do. It's only about 50 gallons of the stuff, right? Besides, the general said, sharing a smirk, if it's classified, who's going to care if we don't follow every rule? Major Steele knew the game. Few people in the army advanced by following every rule, and even fewer succeeded by openly challenging their superiors, especially someone like General Stonewall. With a scowl, he made the call. Clancy. Clancy grinned as he listened. Aha, disposal. GC-161. Got it, Chief. He hung up, far from the frown on the major's face. For Clancy, it was all about the double overtime for hazardous work, away from the regulations that filled the Army's day-to-day life. He and Vern, both equally oblivious to the serious nature of their tasks, took pride in their carefree demeanor. They had a reputation for getting the job done, without asking too many questions. The factory they worked at was a small, unremarkable place known to the locals as Uncle Sam's Cookies, tucked away in a nondescript neighborhood. Most assumed that's all it was. Blake, on the other hand, was having a rough night. At 1:30 a.m., with just half an hour left until closing, no women were in sight. After hearing that spiral staircase was the new hotspot, Blake had spent the past 3 nights there, watching women flock to the muscle-bound men who didn't care to know anything about fashion. Tonight, he had spilled microbrew on his Armani tie, a task he dreaded cleaning. At 27, he still considered himself attractive, but the longer the night dragged on, the more convinced he became that he was losing his edge. Frustrated, he began searching his pockets for his keys, embarrassed at the thought of being caught as one of the last to leave. Rather than stick around to see who else would end the night with him, he decided to head out. He stepped into the parking lot, which had emptied except for a few of the die-hard regulars. Meanwhile, Clancy and Vern were finishing their own shift. Their work was far from glamorous, but they managed to avoid most of the hardship with a thick layer of cluelessness. They transported drums labeled dangerous and caution, unaware that their conversation about the Jets' upcoming game was far more heated than the seriousness of their task. No, Vern, Parcells has taken them as far as they'll go, I'm telling you, Clancy said, struggling with the weight of one drum. Damn, this stuff is heavy. The conversation barely wavered from the game as they worked. By the end of the night, their argument about the Jets' secondary nearly turned physical. But in all their fussing, they failed to notice a small spill from one of the containers. It leaked down the hill, under the fence, and pooled in a parking lot, much like oil under a car on a hot day. Shit. Blake looked down at his old Chevy Impala. Great, the damn thing's leaking again. He kicked the car in frustration, uncertain what the liquid was. He remembered something from a car show and bent down to check it. He wiped his finger in the liquid, smelled it, and then, out of curiosity, tasted it. I don't know what this is, but it tastes better than anything from my car. The phone by Major Steele's bed rang, the time reading 1:20 a.m. It was clear the general didn't care. Major, did you make sure all of the GC-161 was destroyed? Yes, General. The major stifled a yawn, his mind drifting to thoughts of a new scandal, an army version of the tailhook scandal, taking down all the top officers. You didn't let those idiots Clancy and Vern handle it, did you? I mean, my cousin's a good guy, but he shouldn't be dealing with hazardous waste, you know. No, of course not. He would have happily testified against the general if needed. Do you realize the disaster we'd face if this got out to the public? General, the victim would have to. Yes, I know. I approved the project. But you should understand that if someone did consume it and the media found out about the accident, my career would be over and yours would follow right after. Yes, General. Damn car. First it's leaking, now it won't start. Blake's night was only getting worse. Glancing at his empty wallet, he noticed his expired AAA membership, no help there. Frustrated, he swung his legs out of the Impala and landed hard on his knees. I'm pathetic. 3 beers in and I'm already nauseous and seeing things. In the dim light of an empty parking lot, Blake's skin seemed to glow. At first, it was subtle, just a faint, eerie light green hue that only he noticed. 3:30 a.m. The phone rang again. Major Steele. Major, I'm worried. I need you to go to the lab and make sure those containers were disposed of properly. Blake had stopped caring about the car. His skin was more alive than ever. The same fluid he had consumed earlier now coated him, leaving a slick, shiny layer across his body. He swore he'd never eat one of Uncle Sam's cookies again if this goo was what came from their factory. The gloss on his skin wasn't very noticeable, but soon it became too slippery to stay upright. So, he gave up and lay on the pavement, horrified by the glistening sheen covering him. He didn't even notice when the parking lot lights went out. The dead car barely caught his attention anymore. General, are you sure about this? Yes, I'm sure. Now go, the general replied, hanging up the phone. Just my damn luck. I work for a guy who doesn't sleep. The nausea intensified as the glow grew brighter. Blake couldn't see his own skin anymore, blinded by the eerie phosphorescence that had replaced it. With a stomach full of beer and his blood coursing with biotoxins, he finally slipped into an uneasy sleep. A few hours later, the sound of a passing police car's siren pulled him from his troubled rest. At first annoyed by the noise, his discomfort quickly turned to surprise. His nausea had mostly passed, and his skin had started to fade back to its normal tone. For the first time in hours, Blake could hold himself up. The oily slickness on his skin had lessened, though it still felt smoother than usual. He felt ready to sit up and pulled himself up by the door handle. What the hell? He froze. Two somethings, were sitting on his chest. His hands shot to his chest, and he screamed in terror. Vern! Vern's chair tipped dangerously, the legs scraping against the floor. What? Shut up, Clancy, I'm trying to sleep. I swear I heard something, maybe an angry person, or something like that. Aha. Bet it was just an alley cat. You could use some sleep, too, Clancy. I'm going out to check it out, are you coming? Clancy stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and eyed the gun. It might come in handy, if only he'd ever bothered to learn how to use it. Good night, Clancy. It wasn't so much a shout as it was a scream, a short, high-pitched one that cut off abruptly as Blake froze, shocked by the sound coming from his chest. Groping in the dim light, Blake pulled himself upright, determined to take a better look. His skin was no longer green, but it was also no longer covered in hair. After the surprising sensation of his hand running over his chest, Blake moved lower, only to find nothing. Well, nothing that compared to the former state of his body. But it wasn't unfamiliar. The vague shape in the mirror suggested he had the same general form, though things were different now. His nose was shorter, his cheeks higher. It seemed like Blake had somehow transformed into a woman. And that warm feeling he noticed down below, well, it felt worth exploring again. His hand slipped down his pants. Are you all right, ma'am? Blake froze as a sweaty, stocky man bounced down the hill toward the fence. I said, are you all right? A flash of red hair spun around as she stood up. Yes, sir. My car broke down here. Do you have a phone? Sure, up here at the secret cookie factory. The only entrance is around the fence, unless you want to crawl under this hole. Clancy lifted a bent section of chain link about 2 feet off the ground. He wasn't worried about military violations with someone like her. Oh, okay. Blake dropped to his hands and knees, much to Clancy's amusement. She crawled through, unaware of Clancy's gaze, and stood up, brushing herself off. Where's the phone? Right this way, ma'am. On your feet, soldier. If the major was going to be awake for this miserable task, then he'd be damned if he was the only one suffering. Yes, sir. Corporal, what's your name? Vern, sir. I mean your last name. Gaffney. Corporal Gaffney, did you dispose of those biotoxins as I ordered? What biotoxins? The drums. The metal drums, damn it. Oh, the spoiled milk, sure, no problem, sir, right over there. So help me God, if your friend's cousin wasn't the general, The words stopped as the door opened, and Blake walked in. I'd be happy to assist you, young lady, the major stammered. Oh, I just need to use the phone, thank you. Blake walked over to the phone, picked up the receiver, and pressed it to his ear. He slumped to the floor, shuddering. Mr. Forrest? Mr. Forrest? Are you awake? A haze of dreams was interrupted by a sharp poke. Blake's eyes snapped open, and a twisted, familiar face loomed close, some strange cross between Sergeant Schultz and Santa Claus. General Stonewall. Blake tried to push himself up, but his body wouldn't respond. His arms were held above his head, and his legs were spread wide. Experimenting, he discovered soft but unyielding restraints that told him he was stuck in this position for a while. Slightly lifting his head, Blake saw that he had been loosely covered with a sheet, his clothes removed. What's going on here? General Stonewall pursed his lips. Well, I must first apologize on my own behalf. What happened? And on behalf of Major Steele and Colonels Gaffney and Horowitz. What the hell happened? And of course, the Army and government of the United States of America. Stonewall paused, satisfied he had covered all the bases, then continued. You see, my friend, you've unfortunately stumbled upon one of the Cold War's leftovers. A lot of money went into developing advanced weaponry, just in case. And now, you're witnessing your tax dollars at work. He let out a small laugh. This compound, GC-161, was inspired by an Israeli Mossad operation. They killed a PLO terrorist by activating a bomb in his phone with the push of a button. We thought, wouldn't it be great if we could do that to an entire nation? Poison their systems so that the right frequency played over their airwaves would wipe them all out? We were deep into the development when the world changed. The Cold War ended, and so did our funding. These side effects, radical body changes, including the total elimination of male physical traits in rare cases, effectively killed the project. Some nonsense about the Geneva Convention. One of the soldiers at the door corrected him, the Geneva Convention, sir. Whatever. Anyway, we decided to bury the project, so to speak. Then you came along. Your ID and genetic tests labeled you as male, so we're pretty sure you ingested some of the leaked GC-161. Are you going to kill me, sir? Blake whispered. Kill you? After everything we've done to you? Oh no, sweetheart. You deserve better than that. So do we. In fact, the government's taking care of all your problems. You won't have to worry about money or comfort. Blake smiled, he thought he'd hit the jackpot. So when can you let me go? Oh, not for a while. See, it would cause too many problems if anyone found out about this, important people. So we're going to make sure you don't go blabbing. And while we're at it, we've got a little program to help you adjust to your new life. Gentlemen? The soldiers, looking more like professionals than thugs, wheeled in a large screen and set up speakers on either side of Blake's head. One of them inserted an 4 into Blake's hand. That fluid will keep you conscious and nourished for the next week, among other things. Good luck, Missy, we'll be back in a few days. The general walked out, leaving Blake's screams echoing behind him. That week was a blur in Trina's memory. Vague, half-conscious flashes of a booming voice, makeup, teddy bears, and other strange images. She couldn't quite place it all. Trina? Can you take a dictation? Trina snapped out of her thoughts and stood up. The 4-inch black heels never bothered her anymore, not since she'd come out of that dream. Her tight black skirt showcased her legs, and she knew they liked it, and her white blouse, open a little too much thanks to a mysteriously lost button, gave a hint of what was underneath. Each of her blouses seemed to be missing that same button. Snapping a bubble, she walked over to the Major's desk. Of course, Major. I promise I won't mess it up this time. It's quite all right, Trina. Your many skills make you invaluable around here. I'll never understand why I was assigned to an all-male military outpost. Red lipstick today, huh? Anyway, this letter is for General Stonewall, HALFTRACK, General, my sincere thanks for bringing me the results of your latest project. Trina scribbled on the pad, barely listening to what the Major was saying. More pressing was the run in her pantyhose, running down the back of her leg. It was her last pair, and there were no replacements to be found on the isolated outpost. If only she could work out a deal. Trina, dear, why the frown?